Hello and welcome to this week's press preview. Alongside Scott Richey, I'm Aren Dow. Last week there were a lot of kind of lopsided games and very few that were actually competitive in the fourth quarter. But there were a couple games that stood out last week, and Scott, I know that the game that you went to stood out for you.
Well, it was at St. Teresa for their game against Shelbyville, and it stood out for a couple of reasons. It was the first time I had seen St. T this year, and got to get a good look at Christian Williams at quarterback, and he did an awful lot for the Bulldogs. He had more than 300 yards of total offense by himself, and he ran the ball pretty well. He's very athletic. I mean, he's going to do that. If he can get loose. He's also pretty big, and there's not a lot of guys that are going to be able to bring him down easily. What impressed me the most, though, was when he threw the ball. Didn't throw it often. Only had 9 attempts. He completed 5 of them, and he had 223 yards. So a lot of big plays, from him. Granted, J.D. Mattingly and Chris Isom, did a lot of running after the catch for their 2 touchdowns. But he threw a laser to Shane Hawkins, 58 yards, and it was pretty much all 58 go to Christian on that one. It was just one of the best throws I've seen probably this year, just for the sheer distance. And Shelbyville, while they kind of dug themselves an early hole and couldn't dig out of it, gave maybe a glimpse of what's to come for the Rams. They have a pretty young team, not a lot of seniors. I think a big junior class. And one of those juniors is quarterback Lucas Duckett, and he kind of picked apart St. Teresa, with their short passing game. A lot of it was to his tight end Luke McConnell, who's a big kid, definitely bigger than pretty much all of the St. Teresa linebackers, and secondary outside of Christian, who's 6'5", but he plays safety, so he was not kind of really involved too much in the short passing game. And the Rams are gonna continue to struggle this year a little bit, but they have a good foundation with the young team, and arguably one of the best coaches in the area in Mark Ramsey, and he's gonna get those guys whipped into shape. I imagine starting next year, they'll make some big strides a year from now.
The game that stood out for me was MacArthur Champaign Central, which on paper kind of looked like it would be a blowout for MacArthur. It ended up being only a 3-point game, 21-18, and you're looking at that and you say, maybe that's a bad sign for MacArthur, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. Central runs kind of a unique offense that not a whole lot of other teams run, and you look at Danville coming up and Urbana coming up, and those are more pass-oriented offenses. And the way that Central was able to run the ball, I think Toby Rivera had 30 carries for 166 yards, and for the most part, MacArthur's done a fairly good job, besides the Norman West game, of containing the run. And I think it was more of a blip on the radar, and not something to really be concerned about. I think MacArthur still, that defense is good, and the offense, I mean, they still played well, especially Devin Ingram, who is 7 of 8, which is huge. I mean, Ingram has been the quarterback, this is his 3rd year. I think this is a huge game for him to only have, 1 incompletion, really, help, move the ball down the field through the air, and it's not just rushing the ball, and hopefully they can keep that going, because if they can have both that passing game be as much of a threat as the running game, that's going to be extremely important for MacArthur when it comes, if they get those playoffs, which I think they will, that'll be hugely important when it comes to the playoffs. So, kind of like I said, kind of looking forward, MacArthur has Danville next week, who's, very different from what Central had last week. I think it'll be a very high-scoring game compared to this last week, where it was a lot of clock was run down from the running game from both teams, really. So yeah, I think MacArthur, if they get that offense, that same kind of balance that they had this last week, I think they could be very dangerous.
Well, the kind of Central, showed, by killing the clock with their run game, best way to stop MacArthur's offense is to not let them on the field, because they're going to hurt a lot of teams with all the weapons they have in Ingram, Chiquayo and Chantrez Spates, DeVince Lewis, Jalen Souls. I mean, they've got a lot of athletes they can just get the ball to and let them work. So with that MacArthur Danville game, it's big for the Generals, but there's a few other teams that are kind of in must win mode this week if they want to get to that playoffs spot. I think first of all, obviously, is Mount Zion. They picked up their first win of the season last week against Paris. It puts them at 1-4, and they've got to win out, to get to 5 wins and a playoff berth. And it won't, be easy, but they have Charleston, this week. It's a winnable game for the Braves, and they put up 70 on Paris, last week, and gave up 33. So defense is still a little bit of an issue, but I think if if Austin Ray plays like he did against Paris, 6 touchdowns, he got a lot of touches. I think that's going to be key. I mean, their new offense, for the Braves will, probably, be more effective year 2 with Mike Popovich than year 1. So I think until they're really comfortable with that, you have to go with the workhorse, and that's Austin Ray.
Yeah, besides Mount Zion, who does have to win out, Tuscola, they have 3 wins. Obviously, need 2 more to become playoff eligible. And next week, or Friday is big with A&M because they have both Maroa and Argenta on the schedule. And to be fair, I mean, the Tuscola-Argenta game was close last year. And I think it could be just as close this year. I think Tuscola has really looked good, especially Nick Bates at quarterback has played extremely well. I think much better than a lot of people thought kind of coming into the season. They had a very young team, a very young roster, and it might have taken some time, but they've clearly done well early so far. But getting this win this week, with Moreau on the schedule, give a little bit of a cushion to kind of go into the playoffs.
Yeah, and the Warriors, did lose by almost 30 to A&M last year, but it's a different A&M team this year. I mean, at times their offense looks pretty good. Getting the ball to Zach Ballinger a lot is good, but they've struggled on that side of the ball, and they've really struggled stopping teams from scoring too. And Tuscola, they're kind of the resurgence of Tuscola is coming. Rick Reinhardt's got that team playing a little more like the Tuscola you expect, and Nick Bates has the potential to just chew up A&M's defense. And
I think Taylorville is kind of the other team in must-win mode, I guess you could say. Got 4 games left. Need 3 of those, and one is against Jacksonville, which is kind of a tough team. And the schedule they play is so back and forth, where you play your Rochesters and your Springfield SGs, and then you go to Southeast and Lanphier. I mean, it's so up and down that it's kind of almost hard to get a gauge on what that team is, because they'll blow a team out one week and then lose big the next week. But I think Taylorville plays Lincoln this weekend. If they can get that win, that'll be a good 3rd win to get those last 2 against either Southeast and Lanphier.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, it's win this one against Lincoln, or you have to pull off just a serious upset to beat Jacksonville. Jacksonville did slip out of the polls this week. They are 3-2 now, but they played just as many tough teams as Taylorville will in the CS8, and they've just happened to play the tough ones early. Yeah. So kind of while we're on the polls, I mean not a lot has changed. MacArthur actually did pick up a point in the 5A poll. They got 1 10th place vote. Olney moved up a few points. They're still receiving votes in 4A. In 3A, Monticello was 10th last week, tied for 9th this week, so not a lot of change there. But really, in 2A, it's where you can make a couple arguments. And really, I mean, Maroa is the number 1 team still in 2A, deservedly, but they're not the unanimous number 1 and haven't been for the last few weeks. There's one voter still voting Eastland Pearl City as the number 1 team, and that's their choice. And it won't argue with them about that. That's who they think is the number 1 team. So be it. They have beaten Dakota, who, if people remember a few years ago, handed it to Tuscola in a state championship game, and Jake Apple rushed for I think an all-class record rushing yards, almost 400. I think it was like 373. But they're not the Dakota team. That was that team. They're a little down this year. I believe only 2 wins. Pearl City did beat Lena Winslow last week. Again, another one of those upstate powers, but still maybe not the Lena of old. I mean, they're 3-2 and have a loss to Cerro Gordo Bement this year. And Maroa has a signature win that pretty much no one in 2A can top, because they beat the number 1 team at the time in 3A, Talanoa Unity, and really took it to them. I mean, it was a blowout, and Unity didn't even have a chance. That's a signature win. That makes a number 1 team in the state. So that's how I feel, at least.
Yeah, I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now. I don't understand why Cerro Gordo is still at the 8, 10, 9, 10, somewhere in there. I know they're 8 this week, and obviously, traditionally, the northern teams have done well against the southern teams when it comes to 2A. But when you have a game like, they played against Lena Winslow and they show that they can compete, I feel like, a lot of those teams in the middle there, if they're undefeated, they kind of get the benefit of the doubt. And Cerro Gordo has played those games, and they've done very well. And I think they deserve a little bit more attention other than some of those teams. I know like a team like Chester, they're 5-0, but they don't necessarily have the same kind of schedule. It's not quite as impressive. I think you can kind of bump them up over a couple teams where sure they might have the same undefeated record, but not quite as impressive a schedule as Cerro Gordo's been able to put together this year.
Yeah, CGB, their schedule is really front-loaded. I mean, they had Lena Winslow week 1. They've played Westville, Arthur Lovington, Georgetown Ridge Farm. So they've gotten some of their tough opponents in, and they have another one this week against Villa Grove, which we're going to decide pretty much the LOVC champion this week if CGB wins. So they've proven the first 5 weeks of the season that yes, we're that good. So they'll probably stay ranked in 2A. It's just we'll see if they can jump up a little bit. Really, the only other thing in 1A, Argena Oriana did move up a couple spots, and Arthur Lovington Atwood Hammond is still receiving votes. So.
And the big game this week, got to be Maroa Argena. Those two teams, I think, coming in, were two of the more favorited teams in the OCA, and I think it'd be just as big a game as anything else this season. You look at Maroa, and they've done okay against the run game, but you look at some of the numbers. Chris Eisen ran 13 times for 78 yards. Connor Grace from Unity has 12 for 67. Wade Beasley last week ran 14 for 69. So while they don't get maybe a ton of work, they've able to get it past the Trojan defense a little bit, and that's what Argena's best at. I mean, they have two really good running backs in Cameron Hump and Austin Mascunas, and I don't know. I mean, I think if they can get that running game going, if they can make it a kind of a shootout, Argena can keep it close. I think that's kind of the key for Argena is that they really have to. I mean, that strength really has to step up and play well if they want to stay with Maroa. Which
is something that I don't think anyone has really done this year. Maroa's offense with Jack Hockaday. It's really they run the ball some, but it's really Hockaday kind of leading them with the passing game. And he's got 21 total touchdowns. There's one defensive score in there. He returned an interception, but 20 touchdowns passing and rushing puts him on pace for, did the math, 72.5 touchdowns this year if they make it as far as they did last year.
That's quite a bit.
That's a lot. I mean, he had 50, as a sophomore, which is pretty much why he made his stake as the Macon County Player of the Year. And it's going to be on the Argena defense a little to try and contain him a little bit. I mean, because he can hurt you just as much with his legs. I mean, he rushed for over 200 yards last year, and the big win against A&M, and he's got to keep an eye on him. And if you get one stop early in the game, could set the tone for Argena. It's not going to be easy.
So that's going to wrap it up for this week. Be sure to check out Press Pick'em. We got about 5 weeks left, and you do get to drop your one bad week. So if you've had one bad week, don't worry about it. So be sure to check that out, and keep checking back at HR Preps for videos, for stories. We got it all. So thanks for watching.